Japanese baseball has just been hit by the most devastating triple blow in its entire modern history. In a series of events so explosive, so consequential, and so utterly shocking that the baseball world is still struggling to process everything that has happened, three of Samurai Japan's most important and most beloved players have been permanently banned from the World Baseball Classic. Teruaki Sato, Shota Morishita, Seishiro Sakamoto, three names that every Japanese baseball fan knows by heart. Three players who have given everything they have to the sport they love. Permanently banned. Gone. Just like that. But that is only where the story begins. Because within hours of the bans being announced, a physical brawl erupted between Teruaki Sato and Munetaka Murakami that escalated so rapidly and so violently into a major incident that both the Hanshin Tigers organization and NPB were forced to call emergency press conferences simultaneously. And then, in a development that has sent the most powerful shockwave of all through the Japanese baseball world, Shohei Ohtani picked up his phone and made not one but two urgent calls demanding with absolute authority that the decision be reversed immediately. 2 phone calls from the greatest baseball player alive. And the entire baseball world is holding its breath, waiting to find out if anyone is actually going to listen. We are about to tell you everything. The announcement came without warning. There was no leaked information in advance. No quiet signals from inside NPB that something significant was coming. No opportunity for the baseball world to prepare itself for what was about to land. Just a formal statement released by NPB that dropped into the baseball world like a stone dropped into still water, sending ripples outward in every direction simultaneously that grew larger and more powerful with every passing second. Teruaki Sato of the Hanshin Tigers. Shota Morishita of the Hanshin Tigers. Seishiro Sakamoto of the Hanshin Tigers. All three permanently banned from the World Baseball Classic effective immediately. 3 Hanshin Tigers. 3 Samurai Japan players. 3 permanent bans in a single announcement. The baseball world erupted instantly. Fans who had followed these players throughout their careers, who had watched Sato develop into one of the most powerful and dangerous hitters in all of Japanese baseball, who had admired Morishita's extraordinary ability to change the momentum of a game with a single swing, who had celebrated Sakamoto's unique gift for restarting offensive cycles and connecting the bottom of the batting order back to the top, reacted with a mixture of shock, grief, and furious disbelief that flooded social media within minutes of the announcement breaking. NPB's official statement provided limited detail about the specific nature of the violations that had led to the 3 permanent bans. The organization cited serious breaches of conduct standards and behavioral protocols that it determined were fundamentally incompatible with the values and competitive integrity of the World Baseball Classic. Officials stated that the investigation leading to these bans had been thorough, careful, and conducted with full respect for due process, and that the severity of the punishment reflected the severity of what had been found. But the limited detail provided by NPB only intensified the speculation and the outrage that was already building across the baseball world. Fans demanded to know exactly what had happened. Former players called for greater transparency. Media organizations began their own investigations, reaching out to sources inside and outside the Hanshin Tigers organization in an attempt to piece together the full picture of what had led NPB to take action of this magnitude against 3 players from the same team simultaneously. What those investigations began to uncover made the situation significantly more complicated and significantly more explosive than the initial announcement had suggested. To understand what happened, it is necessary to go back several weeks, to a period inside the Hanshin Tigers organization and within the broader Samurai Japan program when tensions that had been building quietly beneath the surface began to push dangerously close to breaking point. Sources within the Hanshin Tigers organization say that the relationship between Teruaki Sato and Munetaka Murakami had been deteriorating for some time before the brawl that would eventually force emergency press conferences from both the Tigers and NPB. The 2 men had a history, a complicated and increasingly fraught history rooted in competitive tensions, personal disagreements, and the kind of accumulated friction that develops between strong personalities operating in close proximity under intense pressure over an extended period of time. Those who knew both men well described the relationship as one that had always contained an undercurrent of rivalry and mutual suspicion that was carefully managed during normal circumstances but became increasingly difficult to contain as the pressures of the Samurai Japan program mounted, and the controversies surrounding Murakami intensified. Sato, according to sources, felt deeply and personally betrayed by Murakami's behavior, by the disciplinary violations, by the deliberate defiance of the organizational structure, by the creation of what former manager Ibata had publicly described as a dual power structure within the national team. Sato had given everything to Samurai Japan. He had prepared with total dedication, competed with total commitment, and conducted himself throughout the tournament with a professionalism that stood in sharp contrast to what Murakami had been doing behind the scenes. And he had watched as Murakami's calculated campaign of internal disruption damaged the team that Sato loved and the program that Sato had sacrificed enormously to be part of. The anger that built inside Teruaki Sato over those weeks was real, deep, and, as events would ultimately prove, impossible to contain indefinitely. It happened at a team facility. The details of exactly what triggered the initial confrontation between Sato and Murakami remain partially disputed by sources on different sides of the situation. But what is not disputed, what multiple witnesses have confirmed clearly and consistently, is what happened once the confrontation began. Words were exchanged first. Sharp, direct, and deeply personal words that went immediately to the heart of everything that had been building between these two men for weeks. Sato confronted Murakami directly about his conduct, about the disciplinary violations, about the undermining of management, about the dual power structure, about the damage that had been done to the team and to the players who had done nothing to deserve being caught in the middle of Murakami's calculated campaign of disruption. Murakami responded. And whatever he said in response was enough to push Sato past the last boundary of his self-control. The physical confrontation that followed was witnessed by multiple players and staff members who were present at the facility. Sources describe it as intense, chaotic, and frightening in its speed and ferocity, the kind of explosion that happens when enormous amounts of compressed emotion are released all at once with no warning and no restraint. It took several people physically intervening to separate the two men. And by the time order was restored, the situation had already escalated far beyond anything that could be quietly managed or discreetly contained, because witnesses had phones. And within minutes the story was moving through the tight network of baseball insiders, journalists, and media contacts that surrounds the Japanese baseball world at every level. And within hours it was everywhere. Morishita and Sakamoto, Sato's Hanshin Tigers teammates and close friends, became entangled in the aftermath of the brawl in ways that sources say drew them directly into the disciplinary process that NPB had already been conducting in relation to the broader pattern of conduct violations within the Samurai Japan program. The specific nature of their involvement has not been fully disclosed publicly. But NPB's decision to include all three Hanshin Tigers players in the same announcement of permanent WBC bans makes clear that officials determined their conduct to be serious enough to warrant consequences of equal severity. The scale and the speed of the fallout from the brawl and the subsequent bans forced both the Hanshin Tigers organization and NPB into emergency response mode simultaneously. Within hours of the story breaking publicly, both organizations announced that emergency press conferences would be held, the Tigers to address the involvement of three of their players, and NPB to provide additional context around the bans, and to respond to the avalanche of public and media reaction that was already building to overwhelming proportions. The Hanshin Tigers press conference was held first. The organization's senior leadership sat before a room packed with cameras and reporters and delivered a statement that was remarkable for both its directness and its evident pain. Tigers officials expressed deep regret over the incidents involving their players and offered an unreserved apology to the Japanese baseball community. They said that the conduct that had led to the permanent WBC bans did not reflect the values of the Hanshin Tigers organization, and that the organization took full responsibility for ensuring that the standards expected of Tigers players, both on and off the field, were upheld at all times. They also addressed the brawl between Sato and Murakami directly, acknowledging that a serious physical altercation had occurred and that it had caused harm and distress to everyone who witnessed it. They said that while they understood the emotional pressures that had contributed to the confrontation, there was no circumstance under which physical violence between players could be excused or minimized. They said that the Hanshin Tigers organization was conducting its own internal review of the incident and would take whatever additional action that review determined to be appropriate. The NPB press conference followed shortly afterward. Senior officials provided additional detail about the investigation that had led to the three permanent bans, confirming that the brawl between Sato and Murakami had been one significant factor in the final determination, but making clear that the investigation had been examining a broader pattern of conduct issues within the Samurai Japan program that predated the physical confrontation. They reiterated that the bans were permanent, that they had been imposed after careful deliberation, and that NPB stood fully behind the decision. And then, just as the NPB press conference was concluding, news broke that sent the entire baseball world into yet another state of complete shock. Shohei Ohtani had made 2 phone calls. The first call went to the NPB commissioner directly. The second call went to a senior official within the WBC organizing structure. Both calls, according to sources with direct knowledge of their content, carried the same message, delivered in Ohtani's characteristic style of quiet intensity that those who know him describe as more commanding than any raised voice could ever be. Reverse that decision immediately. 6 words. From Shohei Ohtani. And the baseball world has not been the same since. Sources say that Ohtani's calls were not requests. They were not suggestions. They were not the diplomatic, carefully hedged interventions of a player mindful of the boundaries between athletic performance and organizational governance. They were direct, urgent, and completely unambiguous expressions of Ohtani's personal and professional conviction that the permanent banning of Teruaki Sato, Shota Morishita, and Seishiro Sakamoto was a decision that needed to be reversed, and reversed immediately. Those familiar with the call say that Ohtani made several specific arguments in support of his position. He argued that permanent bans, as opposed to suspensions of defined duration, were disproportionate to the conduct involved and set a precedent that would cause lasting damage to the careers of players who, whatever mistakes they had made, deserved the opportunity to demonstrate through their future conduct that those mistakes did not define them permanently. He argued that Sato, Morishita, and Sakamoto were not the architects of the crisis that had consumed Samurai Japan, that they were in significant ways victims of it, and that punishing them with the most severe sanction available was a fundamental misattribution of responsibility. And he argued that Japanese baseball, already reeling from weeks of unprecedented controversy and public damage, could not afford to lose 3 more significant players from the national team program in a way that would further deepen the crisis rather than contribute to its resolution. The response to Ohtani's calls from both NPB and WBC officials has not been publicly disclosed. Neither organization has confirmed or denied that the calls took place, though multiple sources with direct knowledge have confirmed them independently. And NPB has not yet announced any modification to the bans that were imposed on Sato, Morishita, and Sakamoto. But the fact that Ohtani made those calls, that the greatest baseball player alive felt strongly enough about this situation to personally and directly intervene at the highest organizational levels, has itself become one of the most significant and most debated elements of an already extraordinary story. The reaction to everything that has happened, the 3 permanent bans, the brawl between Sato and Murakami, the dual emergency press conferences, and Ohtani's 2 urgent phone calls, has divided the Japanese baseball world and the broader international baseball community in ways that reflect the genuine complexity and the genuine difficulty of what everyone involved is trying to navigate. Many people believe that NPB had no choice but to act decisively and that the permanent bans, however painful, send a necessary and overdue message that conduct of this nature within the national team program will not be tolerated regardless of the talent or the reputation of the players involved. They argue that maintaining the integrity and the authority of the organizational structure that governs Japanese baseball requires exactly this kind of firm and unambiguous response, and that allowing personal advocacy, even from someone as respected and as influential as Ohtani, to override that response would set a dangerous precedent of its own. Others argue with equal passion that Ohtani is right, that permanent bans are a step too far, that Sato, Morishita, and Sakamoto have been caught in the destructive wake of a crisis they did not create, and that Japanese baseball's path to recovery requires wisdom and proportionality rather than maximum force. They point to the fact that the true architect of Samurai Japan's collapse, as Abada made clear in his NHK appearance, was Murakami, and they question whether justice is truly being served by imposing the harshest available punishment on players whose culpability is significantly less clear. NPB must now make a decision, not just about whether to maintain or reverse the bans on Sato, Morishita, and Sakamoto, but about what kind of organization it wants to be in the aftermath of the most damaging period in the history of the Japanese national baseball program, about whether its priority is punishment or rebuilding, about whether it is willing to hear the voice of the sport's greatest player and consider whether that voice is pointing towards something true and important. Ohtani has spoken. Twice. Clearly. Urgently. Directly. The question now is whether anyone in a position of authority within Japanese baseball is ready to listen. Teruaki Sato, Shota Morishita, Saishiro Sakamoto, 3 players sitting with permanent bans and an uncertain future. Munetaka Murakami sitting with the knowledge that his actions set in motion a chain of events whose consequences have now reached far beyond himself and landed on the shoulders of people who were his teammates and his colleagues. The Hanshin Tigers organization dealing with a crisis that has put 3 of its most important players at the center of a national controversy. NPB facing the most significant test of its leadership and its judgment in modern memory. And Shohei Ohtani, who never asked to be at the center of any of this, using the weight of his extraordinary influence to fight for what he believes is right. Japanese baseball has been through a great deal in recent weeks. It has absorbed shock after shock, revelation after revelation, controversy after controversy. It has watched its national team program fracture and collapse under the weight of conflicts and failures that nobody on the outside fully understood until Ibata sat down on NHK and told the nation the truth. But this moment right now may be the most consequential of all. Because the decision that NPB makes in response to Ohtani's 2 phone calls will define not just the immediate futures of 3 banned players. It will define the character of Japanese baseball itself at a moment when that character is being tested more severely than it has been in a generation. 3 players banned. 1 brawl that changed everything. 2 phone calls from the greatest player alive. And 1 decision that the entire baseball world is waiting for Japanese baseball to make. Thank you so much for watching. This is the most explosive and most consequential story in Japanese baseball right now, and we want to hear absolutely everything you think about it. Do you think NPB should reverse the bans on Sato, Morishita, and Sakamoto? Do you think Ohtani is right to intervene so directly? Drop every thought and every reaction you have in the comments section below. And please subscribe to our channel right now because the biggest and most dramatic developments in Japanese baseball are happening every single day, and you absolutely cannot afford to miss a single moment of what is still to come.